This is Unger 101, the politics of Roberto Mangabeira Unger. We turn to part 2 of 5 on universal politics. When we talk about politics, we usually talk at the level of national politics. Do you support President Obama's healthcare bill? Is this environmental policy good or bad? Who's better, the Democrats or Republicans? To understand Roberto Mangabeira Unger's political program, you have to understand that when he's outlining his political philosophy, he's speaking at the level of universal politics. By universal politics, we don't mean international politics, like who's going to vote for what at the United Nations. Rather, we mean foundational political debates about how society should be organized. Those putting forth ideas at the level of universal politics are advocating a general set of social, political, and economic ideas that could inform any local situation at any time. They are putting forth principles, not drafting up specific blueprints. In the 19th century and the early 20th century, there were often debates at the level of universal politics. Marx and Lenin, for example, put forth the universal political framework of communism, arguing that society should be arranged to be classless, centered on the common ownership of the means of production. At the turn of the century, G.K. Chesterton put forth distributism, a system of widespread private property ownership, where society distributes the means of production and property among the populace, away from both the state and a small band of elite businessmen. Advocates for the universal political framework of neoliberalism, like Friedrich Hayek, advocate that nations should have a small government, a large laissez-faire private sector, and pursue policies of economic liberalization, like privatization, deregulation, low taxation, and free trade. Unger is in a category with these universal political thinkers. And when these originators of these universal political frameworks, Unger included, explained their ideas for the first time, they weren't just commenting on specific national issues at specific times. They were putting forth principles, not drafting up specific blueprints. So, what happened to debates about universal politics? Well, we stopped experimenting with radically different frameworks in the 20th century, and then the final major alternative framework, communism, fell in the late 1980s, so most of the world was left with one framework in town, neoliberalism. As a universal political framework becomes dominant, people forget that it is one of many possible societal arrangements and begin to believe that that one framework is natural and necessary, the only possible way society could be organized. Unger calls this phenomenon of the loss of competing frameworks global orthodoxy. Under global orthodoxy, politics becomes smaller, as we all presume the orthodoxy is given and argue within the boundaries of it. Thus, many debates in national politics today are whether our neoliberal society should be more libertarian, more deregulated industries, lower taxation, thinner entitlement programs, or more social democratic, more regulation, higher taxation, larger entitlement programs. These produce vigorous internal debates, but most on both sides of the spectrum presume the same foundational arrangements. Success should be measured by economic growth. People should work daily for wages as employees. The government mostly lays off the institutions of the economy and only steps in at tax day to reduce inequality. There should be a free flow of capital, but a restricted flow of labor over borders. Markets only fail due to externalities rather than due to any fundamental contradictions. And we can only imagine a hydraulic model between the market and the state. More market equals less state, more state equals less market, and no imaginative alternative where the two work together cooperatively. Many are disappointed with this global orthodoxy of neoliberalism, for we have seen little broadening of opportunity due to it, and are disturbed by nations being forced to copy the institutions and practices established in the US and Europe, and thus being denied the opportunity to house distinctive ways of organizing their own society. So, people struggle against this global orthodoxy. However, Unger believes that those who are disappointed with the current universal political framework continue to be stymied in their effort for change because they are fighting the results of this global orthodoxy with only national and local ideas, rather than with a new universal political framework. They are saying we need to reform tariffs and regulations in this country, or we need to block this free trade deal out of this administration, without having a vision of what their full alternative is. To Unger, you need to fight global orthodoxy with a global heresy, a new universal political framework that provides an alternative to neoliberalism at the foundational level. This is why we have trouble categorizing Unger's political thought. He is not debating President Obama or Paul Krugman or Milton Friedman. He is debating the 19th century thinkers who set up the context in which current political debates are set. To summarize, 1. When Unger lays out his political program, he debates at the level of universal politics, not national or party politics. 2. A contest of ideas of universal politics used to exist, but because only one world political framework is dominant, neoliberalism, politics has become smaller. 3. Unger believes you have to fight a global orthodoxy with a global heresy. Thus, Unger is putting forth his own universal political framework. We will get to what that global heresy is in part 4, but for now, let's examine how Unger thinks about the current state of the standard bearers of change in society. The left.